it was so much fun. You would like be singing and holding hands while you're singing. And it's all these like young people all hopped up on hormones talking about God and trying to be saved. And like what I found really interesting about it was the more I felt Jesus publicly, the more attention I got, which was very,
Interesting.
very interesting.
Eileen Tull, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. I'm super excited to have you on as a guest. We've known each other tangentially for quite some time, and now you, I don't know why I said now, in the past, you submitted to be on the podcast, and I was super stoked. One, because I just think you're cool, but two, I think your background is really interesting, and I don't feel like I've had many guests, if any, on the podcast that have talked about some of the things that you mentioned in your submission. And so I've just been kind of waiting to pick your brain, but enough for me. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm Eileen, and I am a theater director and an educator and a performer, writer, sort of Jill of all trades. And I'm from Southern Ohio, and I grew up in a place where a lot of rich people lived. I was not
Love
one of
that for
the
you.
rich people. Yeah, I was legitimately, there was a set of train tracks I had to drive over to go to school in the rich people place. So that was like, I was from the other side of the tracks.
Quite literally. That's
Mhm.
impressive.
Yeah. And so I would say I didn't really realize how I thought I just lived in like a normal place, whatever normal means to us, and I didn't realize how kind of closed off and conservative I grew up in. And then I went to school in Chicago at Loyola. So my freshman year of college was a pretty big like, oh wow, there are
Yeah.
people who are not white, and like there are people who are of all different backgrounds, and there are people who think things and people who say things, and gay people everywhere. Like, oh, you get off at the Belmont stop, I was like, wow, this is an education. So
Wow. That is a culture shock.
yeah.
Interesting. And so how did you go from small conservative town in Ohio to like basically liberal arts college in Chicago, Illinois?
Yeah, I mean, it's that temptress, that seductress theater, it's the
That wench, that seductive
Mhm.
wench.
Yes, the performing artists. Yeah, very very siren song. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I say I grew up in a very conservative place, and I did, but then there are a lot of things about the way I grew up that were very not traditional. And like my mom was a stay at home mom, but there was no sense that she wasn't a housewife,
Right.
you
Big
know.
difference. Right.
And I grew up with a lot of siblings, and my dad was sort of the breadwinner, but he was also like a teacher. So it wasn't as if
Interesting.
he made the money and she did the dishes, like the sort of.
Right.
So they had a very traditional setup, but a very
Mm.
non-traditional relationship. And, their personalities were very not of that kind of, my mom's not a meek housewife and my dad's
Yeah.
not a like overbearing alpha.
Right. And how did that even keel of that relationship parallel or maybe deflect from the conservative religious aspect of your upbringing? Like, because I'm a very similar way where my church was conservative, but my mother was very liberal.
Mm,
So when I think back on my childhood, it's a lot of my mom telling me, like, as a woman, I can do whatever I want to do. The church telling me, as a woman, I will sit at the feet of my husband and do what I'm told. And so, like, how did that align, or did it at all?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I would never describe my parents as politically liberal,
Right. Right.
but in terms of lifestyle,
Yes.
it's a really interesting thing. Like my mom, I've seen my mom wear a dress maybe 3 times. You know, no, not like we weren't doing makeup and dolls, and she was a very big tomboy, and I was,
Interesting.
yeah, I had 2 older brothers, and so I was raised to keep up with the boys. Like that's what
Right.
was, a freeing thing to be able to. She was an athlete, so it's like to run and to sweat. Um, and my dad was a football coach for a long time, so it was very much about like expressing yourself through sports. But the other thing was that I always say my dad was probably the only human being alive who was a Notre Dame football player and also a Notre Dame Glee Club participant.
That's great. But go dad. That's great.
Mhm.
That's the opposite of toxic masculinity. That's like being absolutely sure of yourself as a man.
Yeah. So it was a lot of like, we all did sports, and then we all did theater, and we all did choir, and we all did this, and we all did that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Sports and theater. I can't
Oh yeah.
even
That
imagine.
that was such a thing. I don't know if it was my area or I don't
Hmm.
know. Like a lot of people did both. Almost
I'm
everyone.
here for it. I've just never seen such
Yeah.
a thing in my life.
And then, the year I got to college was the year High School Musical came out, and it was all about like basketball or the musical. And I was like, bro, you just do both. Like,
Like, just go to Ohio and do both. I don't
yeah,
understand what the problem
do it in
is.
the off season. Like, what are you talking about? So yeah, it was a very the idea of being well-rounded was really important. And part of being well-rounded was also like having your relationship with God and with Jesus, and
Interesting.
that being a huge part of everyone's life as well.
Interesting. And so when you wrote in, you mentioned a youth group cult.
Yeah.
Where does that play into this? Like, where? Because what you're describing to me now is like a Mayberry utopia where you're
Yeah.
allowed to like do theater and express yourself and also go to church and also play sports. So where's
What
the
is
young people cult
that?
come in?
Yeah, I think more what I had been describing was more like my high school experience,
Right.
which was also, I would say, a public school. So that sort of started the like, oh wow, people are different. People can be not just the exact same. In middle school, I would say even before middle school, yeah, I started to go to this youth group that, and I say cult lovingly,
Right. Like
but
with the most endearing.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in the way that I do think, like, theater is a cult, stand up is a cult. There are so many
It
things.
is.
Have you ever read the book Cultish?
No.
Shout out to the book Cultish, by
Never
Amanda
heard that.
Montell. It's very good. It's about the language of cults and the
Interesting.
so she's a linguist. So it's from the
Oh.
perspective of phraseology and how they weaponize language more than anything else.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so she has a podcast where she talks about things too, and it is like they go through like the cult of Wall Street, the cult of musical theater, the cult of airplane points,
Huh, I'm gonna talk to her, hopefully, if
Yeah,
she responds to me.
yeah. And
Interesting.
it's a really so the idea of like calling something a cult, I think is like, yeah, we are all part of our
Absolutely.
own little cult worlds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a guest, Dr. Jack Wathy, talking about so many different kinds of cults. We identify cults because of, like Hollywood tells us that cults are, Jonestown or Charles Manson. But cults can, like you said, cults can be CrossFit.
Mhm.
You can find yourself in a CrossFit a cult, an MLM cult, a ballet cult, a band cult, like any group that starts to take on that mentality and, like you said, that verbiage. Absolutely can be a cult. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
have God involved in any way.
No. And I think that, one thing that really always kind of not necessarily sounds the alarm bells for me, but like gives me that feeling of, oh, am I in a cult like situation? Is when everybody is like, all the participants are ecstatic to be there, and everyone is going to come back next week, and the week after, and the week after that, and the week after
Yes.
that. And that can be lovely. Like in theater, that's you want to make people feel that way so that they come back and see the next show, and that, oh, they come back and then they get involved and all that sort of thing. As a teacher, you want people to feel like they're part of a community. And with this group, it was for a lot of people that were homeschooled. I was
Okay.
going to school at the time that I first started there, but it was kind of like a social outlet for the homeschool community. And then if you kind of reverse it back, you're like, well, why is everybody homeschooling? And it was because there wasn't enough religious teaching in schools.
Okay.
Which I think if you're in Southern Ohio, you're in no danger of like there not being enough religion
Being
in
led
there.
astray.
Yeah, where it's like the hell is real billboard is like that's one of our staples. We got that. Um, and so then it was so much fun. You would like be singing and holding hands while you're singing, and it's all these like young people all hopped up on hormones talking about God and trying to be saved. And like what I found really interesting about it was the more I felt Jesus publicly, the more attention I got, which was very,
Interesting.
very interesting to me at the time. I was a big fan of getting attention, and have not grown out of that.
Yeah. That's
Very
oh
much.
man, is that not true? I feel the same way. Yup.
Yeah. And so then like we would be going to these, we would have sometimes we would go to mass together as the group, and sometimes you would go to adoration,
What's
which
adoration?
adoration is when they open up the little tabernacle where the body of Jesus lives,
Okay.
and you just like are like right there with the body, which is, again, I mean, it's just little wafers. It's like
Right.
you're with the crackers, and you're feeling that it is actually Jesus. In Catholics, we believe like the body and the body and blood gets transformed, so that the objects, the bread and wine, are no longer bread and wine. They are straight up the body and blood. So basically,
Interesting.
like the leftovers are sitting there, and you're in the presence. So sometimes you do silent adoration. Sometimes people get very moved. And I started to notice that the more I felt moved, the more I started to experience attention, and the more I started to experience like just I was doing it right. Like if you start to go kind of crazy, you're feeling it, and you are
Yeah.
doing it right. You've been chosen.
Yep.
And that was a very interesting like thing to look back
Interesting.
on.
Baptists call that charismatic.
Mhm.
Charismatic. So basically this was just being in the room with like a representation of the body and the blood of Christ. This wasn't even the actual communion. This was just being there in the presence of it.
Correct, correct.
Interesting. And then do you do communion after, or is that just the end of it?
No, I think, usually it was just like an hour of worship, you know.
Oh,
And I got to be once I did get homeschooled, I would go over to the church across the street, which was not the church involved in the youth group, but you could go over for 7 a.m. mass, and then 8 a.m. adoration. So I would be there, for like 2 or 3 hours. It was, and I was 12.
And was that for like was that to be seen there, or did you genuinely believe like all of this that you were a part of?
It's hard to parse the line,
Same. Yeah, absolutely.
but I at the time, it was, like, because I genuinely believed it and felt like that was my not only, like, my mission in life was to be for Jesus, but also, like, that is how I get value,
Yeah.
is is like being a little soldier of Christ. Um,
Interesting.
yeah,
I've
because it's a
never heard
lot
this
of
from like the Catholic perspective. This is
oh, yeah.
fascinating.
Oh, yeah, we're great, and well, and part of it is, like, a lot of the Irish Catholic, like, shame-based sort of sinner thing, it's so I'm also, like, a recovering alcoholic, and so it all just was, like, so up my alley. Like, "Yeah, I'm a piece of shit. I'm the worst person alive, but if I go and I sit in front of some, crackers and juice and really just ultra focus, like, that's gonna make me a better person." And I don't know, at the end of the day, what I always find interesting about religious services, taking an hour out of your week to turn off your phone, to turn off your brain, to just focus, to be in the present moment is really good for you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like,
It's a really
meditation.
great thing.
Right. Like I think that prayer, what I used to get from prayer, you can still get from meditation, regardless of, who you're talking to. Like
Yeah,
you said, unplugging for a second and just like sitting with yourself. I don't think that's a bad thing.
yeah, and the idea of talking to someone I had a friend pass away last year in a very sudden, awful way, and so it's like, well, I talked to her, it's
Yep.
a similar I'm not necessarily asking her to, like, do all the favors I used to ask Jesus, I don't know how much power she has, but
Right.
it's the idea of being able to talk to the universe, talk to certain
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
those things, I don't mean to sound like I mock the whole idea of it,
No,
but
not at all.
there's something very funny to me about, like, a little 12-year-old waking up and going over and thinking that this is what life is all about.
Right, right. I feel like, and maybe you agree or disagree, at least as Baptists, like the evangelicals I have talked to, there's always a phase between, like, 10 and 12 where you become the most devout religious child you can possibly become. Like, unrelated to anything my mom ever told me. I just was on this personal journey to be this, what I now know is like an evangelical child. I wanted to be perfect in God's eyes. I read devotion, I did my best to memorize the Bible. It didn't actually happen, but I tried. Do you feel like you had the kind of like the Catholic version?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think it also, for me, lines up with, like, when you start getting horny, that's when you've gotta start getting devout,
Yes.
you're like,
Yeah.
"Wait a second,
Yes.
and I've got
Yes.
all these feelings, and I'm gonna channel them to Je" and, Jesus, I mean,
Listen,
if you're a straight girl,
he can
Jesus
do it
ain't
for
bad.
you.
That's
Yeah.
right.
He can do it for you. He's a
Yeah.
he's a Keanu Reeves over there
Oh,
based
yeah,
on
it's
what
like
they show us.
shaking his hair out, and he's
Mhm.
always, traipsing around in very little clothing. It's like, "Whoa, Jesus is"
And he's always ripped. I've never seen Jesus go through like a spongy phase. He always looks ripped. I
Mhm.
don't know how he does it. Probably all that crackers and wine, but,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, he and his bros, they just work out. Like, that's
Yeah. Yeah, he and his 12 bros, man, they just work out together.
yeah,
That's where CrossFit comes from, don't you know?
yeah, yeah.
Um, so so was there ever a point during all of this where it seemed like off to you, or you weren't quite sure why you were doing it, or anything felt weird in the slightest that in hindsight might kind of be the first moment you kind of segued towards secularity?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was, part of so this group that we were with, a lot of people were really, isolated into, like,
Mhm.
that community.
Got it.
I
Got it.
didn't have any other friends. I had been to school, I had had friends in school, I'd gone to school for since, up to 7th grade. I knew people. I had a lot of experiences, and it felt like, oh, these are people who have not had a lot of experiences. And so I had people who were older than me. And at that age, anybody older than you is like so important.
Yes.
Telling me that the Wizard of Oz is demonic, that Harry Potter is demonic, and Harry Potter had
Heard that
just
one.
come out. So I'm the same age as the actors in Harry Potter.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, so like, I mean, I really wanted to be Hermione. Didn't get an audition. Didn't know how to submit an audition when I
Didn't
was.
even know they were having them.
I don't know. I was like, I'm not British. Uh, but like, so the books were coming out as I was coming of age. And I was like, I'm reading these and they're not demonic. I've seen The Wizard of Oz. It's not demonic. And I've like, there was also this idea of anybody not in our group was sinful and secular and
Interesting.
kind of doing things badly. And I was like, but I also know people who are still Catholic, but just not as super Catholic. So like, how can that happen? One moment that always sticks out for me is we were at this big long retreat. It was like a 2-day retreat at the cathedral downtown. I forget, we had all these, it was like World Kids Day, or anytime there was like something on the calendar, it was like everybody can come and it was the Basilica. That's what it was. And, hang out in the big giant church, and we do different workshops and different like scripture readings and things like that. And everybody got pizza at lunch. That was the biggest excitement.
Yes.
And so then they were like, we're going to teach you, we're going to give, receive the gift of tongues is what we're going to do. You're going to receive the gift of tongues. And Catholicism is a little bit more uptight. I feel like.
Yeah, I'm surprised they introduced that to you guys.
Yeah, because I've been to some other services and some other sects of Christianity, and it's like being even in like there are certain sects of Catholicism where it's like it's okay to like express yourselves.
Yeah, they get a little wild sometimes.
Oh,
Some of these.
yeah.
Yeah.
But white Catholicism is pretty straightforward. Like you stand when you're supposed to stand, and if you don't stand up, you're a fucking asshole. And you're like, oh my God.
Right.
It's all very like nobody blinks an eye, nobody like cracks a smile. So I was really excited because this again was like something where you could be a little bit more emotional, because that's what we did in our youth group. Like we sang, our God is an awesome God. He ran, all of those things I love doing. So they were like, anyone who wants to receive the gift of tongues, come on over to the circle in the middle of the circle. And everyone laid hands on, it was like me and 3 other people. And everyone's laying hands on us, which again, when you're like 12, 13, you're like, everybody's touching me. Like,
Yes.
oh
Yes.
my God.
Basically, we're married now.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have lists of like, Steve put his hand on my shoulder during prayer. Like I held hands with Josh during the Our Father. And yeah. But so I'm in this thing, and they're sort of like the leader of our group is like, here's how you're going to receive it. And she starts doing it, and she's like making all this kind of noise, and it's sort of babble. It's syllables. She's being taken over by the Spirit. And I'm like, okay. And I'm waiting to be taken over by the Spirit. Then the other 2 people get it, and they start yelling, and it's gibberish, and they're all, but they got it. And I'm kind of, again, just waiting to receive it. And it was a long time. Everyone's, praying and asking and whatever. So she kind of comes over to me and she whispers, and she just goes like, just make it up. Just make it up. Just say things. Just make it up.
What?
And I was like, and then everyone's like, oh, oh,
Whoa.
she did it. Like, God, the spirit is with her. God is blessed, Eileen. And I sort of was like, yeah, you know?
Whoa, that's intense. That's like because so for anybody listening who doesn't know, speaking in tongues is when you basically like what you just described, when you're so overcome with the spirit that you start involuntarily speaking in a language that doesn't exist. So the whole point of speaking in tongues is that nobody's supposed to understand you. You're so taken with the spirit that God sends basically a made up language to you and it comes out of you through like the Holy Spirit, but you're not supposed to like just make it up.
Right.
Like it's supposed to be given to you. Like she said, you're going to be given the gift of tongues.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's I don't know why, but that like spooks me a little bit because it
It's
makes you wonder like what else did she do in front of you guys all the time that she knew she was actively making up?
Well, and then it sort of it didn't all fall apart right away, but it sort of began the little tug of the thread of like,
Yeah.
if I'm just making this up,
Yeah.
like what else is made up? You
Yeah.
know, like the idea that people really feel the spirit, the idea that, God is talking to me through something, or that I'm being sent a sign from God, or, my prayer's not being answered because I'm not like, I'm not giving enough to God yet, or I need to go
Yeah.
confess some more. And that's why my prayer's not being answered.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, is this something that people made up hundreds and thousands of years ago? And people just cling on to it because we need these things to cling on to. And I was like, oh God. And then I went to public high school where it was like, hey, the world exists. Then I went to
Yeah.
Chicago and they were like, they were like, the world really exists.
Right, right. Chicago's like offered the gift of what? Like you're speaking in what? Like are you crazy?
Yeah.
Wow. And so was that moment kind of painful or was it more confusing? Did you feel like lied to or did you feel more like maybe you just weren't getting it?
I felt it felt like the latter, where it was like, oh man, like I wasn't special enough so that I had to make it
Jeez.
up.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like the moment, uh, spoiler alert for anybody, that the moment I found out Santa wasn't real,
Whoa. Whoa.
oh boy, oh boy.
Whoa. Slinging accusations around, Eileen.
Right,
We
or at
need
least
to relax.
in my belief system, how I believe Santa to not be real.
Yeah, I was gonna say Santa is first of all just gave me presents like 2 weeks ago, so you need to relax.
Fair, fair, fair. No, but I found a note from Santa in my dad's handwriting, my dad's very distinct handwriting when I was like 9.
Yeah.
I was like "Dad, what are you doing?" And that was like unlocking a mystery, because I sort of went from no questioning the belief at all to like, what? Oh, now, like, it's so obvious you can't ignore it.
Yes.
Um, and it's how I still feel about religion, where it's like, who am I to say there is no God? And who am I to say that all the people who have benefited from religion, that's not real? It is real
Right.
to them.
Right, right. And that's something that like I consider myself as atheist as it gets, but I always believe people when they tell me they believe in God, when they tell me they felt God, they've seen God, they've experienced God. I believe them 100%. The best way, and I've said this like 100 times on the podcast, so they're probably sick of me saying this, but the best way that I can kind of describe the way that I view it is, you know how sometimes when people eat cilantro, they taste soap, right?
Yes,
That's like a
yes.
genetic thing. That's not me. When I eat cilantro, I taste cilantro. I like cilantro. Other people, when they eat cilantro, they taste soap. Never experienced that in my life, but I believe them. I 100% believe them when they eat the exact same thing and they go, "Ew, this tastes like soap." Oh, like this is a gross experience for me. I feel like religion is the exact same way. Some people they're a part of it and they're like, this makes sense. I feel this. I'm into this. I believe this. And other people are like, no, thanks. I don't get it. I don't feel it. I don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think too, the thing is, I feel like for me, the space that I was raised in didn't work for me as
Right.
an adult. And I
Right.
think, and I do think in some ways it was a specifically, I do think that is a harmful space.
Mm.
I think there's a general sect of, I don't know if it's just Southern Ohio or if it's smaller versions, but I feel
Right.
like that was um, not good for people. And I have seen more examples of organized religion being harmful than helpful in my
Right.
life.
Right.
And I'm like, look, if we can disorganize religion a little bit, great, and that if we can all appreciate that, like when I see a butterfly land on a flower, that's God, instead of like I'm gonna, manipulate people and harm them as children. It's like, I don't know, yeah,
Right.
they're not gonna get me back.
Yeah. God is often not the problem. Religion is often the problem.
Yeah.
Like, God's never said shit to me, like, at all, of any kind, negative
Yeah.
or positive.
Yeah.
Religion, different story.
Yeah.
Different. So what people tell me God should say to me, or God would say to me, or God does apparently say to me, much different, much
Yeah.
more harmful. Yeah.
Well, and that's where the idea of the cult comes in, because you can't I think we as humans, like I don't think we're really wired to have a leaderless society. Like I think we
Right.
do want to be told what to do. We need structure. We
Right.
From the time we're kids, you have your mom and dad, you're like, those are the people who are going to tell me what to do. Or you have
Right.
grandma, you have an aunt, you have teachers, you have people that structure your life a little bit. And I think we get out of being a child and we're like, well, but who's going to tell us what to do a little bit? We still I need to be influenced.
Yeah. I still ask myself that every day. I'm like, when's the grown up going to show up? When are they going to show up and help me?
Yeah.
Because I don't like this right now.
Yeah. I just need an outline.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that a lot of people look at religion and say, oh, I want to start my own church, or I want to start my own group, or I want to have this, XYZ. I want to start a theater company. I want to start a stand-up show. I want to, start a
Yes.
poetry night. And then if you are not careful, the cult of personality takes over, and that just does a lot of damage. And I feel like I've been
Yeah.
in a position of running things or being in charge of things, and I try my best to not make it about me as the leader, or
Right.
me and someone else as the leader. And I think you have to like
Right.
actually put care into doing that. And but a lot of people aren't interested in that. They want to be
Yes.
the person at the pulpit
Yes.
getting all the donations.
Yes, there is 100% that stereotype of the person who hosts the open mic so they can be at the mic in between each person, so they can open
Mhm.
the show, close the show, do a bit in between each person. Oh yeah, absolute stereotype. And so at what point did you kind of admit to yourself, or was there a moment, or was it gradual, where you were like, I don't think I'm a religious person anymore. That doesn't seem like it's my tag anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if there was ever like a moment, that it got to be. So I have a lot of siblings, and I would say the siblings that I still um, have relationships with are the siblings who have distanced themselves from the Catholic Church.
Mm.
Um, and some of that is coincidental, but it's also like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think as we all started to grow up, and there was this idea that like for my oldest brother, like he didn't go to Christmas mass with us one year. He was like, I'm not going to do that. And it was like, oh,
And
my
that's a big deal. Like, we're talking about it, but for people who've never been in that position where you finally are like, I'm not going to do this public display that I could theoretically just do. I'm not going
Mhm.
to do it anymore. That's like kudos to him because that is not easy.
Oh, yeah. It was a big deal, and it was he must have I think we both were in college, at the time, but it was a big deal, and then it was like, "Oh, well, now I feel like I can also," because I hadn't been going to church.
Right.
It wasn't like, "Oh, wow, I go every Sunday," and now
Right.
it was like, I only go when I'm at home and I'm forced to.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but it became this kind of the door was opened,
Mm.
and then as, we sort of moved forward and the more non-traditional things got, it was like, yeah, people live with their significant other and they're
The
not married.
blaspheme. The
Right.
blaspheme.
And it's like I'm a single woman who lives alone and pays for her own life and has no children. And it's like, oh,
You
mm,
must be lonely.
mm.
How horrible.
I know. It's so sad to be able to do whatever I want.
Yeah. Like, it's so sad to just have food in the fridge that's still there when I get
Yeah,
home. Nobody's
yeah,
eaten it. Nobody's taken it. I know
yeah.
exactly where it's at.
My nephew was asking me because he was sort of he didn't ask me like why don't you have kids, but he sort of was like, what do you do? And I was like, I just like literally do whatever I want.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
that's what I do, man.
Well, and it's interesting to me too because when you talk to I'm just gonna say it for anybody listening. When you talk to conservative boomers, I'm just saying it, just saying it. There are others too, but in my experience, it is usually boomers. If you live with your significant other, they say the whole, well, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? And then when you live by yourself, because I've done both, they say, well, you're basically like a spinster rotting away. How are you going to find a man if you're in your apartment by yourself all the time? How would a husband, how would a man, my favorite ones are like, how would a man put up with your independence? Not all of them are like that, but I got that all the time when I lived by myself is, well, if you're so independent, you're going to scare all the men away. It's like, which do you want? Who am I supposed to
Well,
live with then? Just a bunch of women?
and am I just a cow setting up shop at the farmer's market, milking myself and
Right.
selling it to different men? I don't
On
understand.
OnlyFans for a
Yes.
significant amount of money.
Look, you know what? If they'll buy my milk, then
Listen, listen. In this economy, anything
that's right.
goes.
That's right. It's skim, baby.
Yeah, yeah.
I got skim. I got 2%. I got whole. Oh, oh,
Yeah, visit me on
cool.
special days if you pay my higher subscription fee, you get the half and half.
Ugh, yeah, a slutty cow selling whole milk. Gross. Um, but I will say for my parents, I have not gotten that kind of pressure of
Good.
the specific pressure of like get married and have kids. And I also think like they each of my parents came from parents, and those parents had very specific views of religion and how God works in a family, and a lot of really like my grandfather spent his retirement writing books that were
Wow.
basically, yeah, they were basically like reflections in Christ,
Oh,
and he just had all these like musings about, like, one would be about sports, and he would be like just writing. It was they were really just journals that he got published, like he got his own journals published pretty
that's
much.
cool.
um yeah, he was a horrible person.
Oh, well then, fuck that guy.
Right, but at the time it was like, I think what's helpful is to be like, wow, anybody can publish a book.
Yeah, oh, so literally anyone but me can apparently get
Yeah,
published.
like, oh, it is a low bar, but so his a lot of things that my parents were given from their parents was like very traditional, greatest generation kind of stuff, and it's filtered. It hasn't they didn't get rid of all their stuff, but it filtered down to our generation. And yeah, I think it's like with family generational trauma, you're like, okay, how much can I not pass on?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There are some times where I catch myself saying something just like my grandma, and I'm like, "Whoa!" Like, "Whoa, Juanita, calm down." like, "Whoa."
Ooh, there
Yeah.
she is, you know,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. And so, have you ever talked to any of your non-religious siblings about it? Like, has it ever come up? Have you ever been like, "So, what about you?"
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say that that for the non-religious siblings, it's not even that they're not religious. It's just that the ones that are religious, it's so present in their personalities that it I don't know, it's not even like anti. It's just like, yeah, well, we don't make God the center of our lives.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
it's
Yep.
we don't make God the third person in our marriage.
Yes. Yeah,
You
that
know,
that is interesting when your version of being basically a heathen is just not having an opinion about it. like your version of being a rebel is just not. You're not even going the opposite. You're not even starting a podcast talking about how you're an atheist all the time. Oh, sorry, that's me. Sorry, that was my job.
Mhm.
Like you're not even doing that. You're just like, I I am neutral, and people are like, well, you should be ashamed.
Yeah,
So, if anything, I've always wondered if that highlights to the ultra religious people how ultra religious they are. But what I think happens, and this is just coming from what I would have liked back when I was super religious, is that probably makes them feel better about themselves even more. Like, oh, I'm ultra pious, like I'm ultra religious, like I'm very, that's probably what my brain would have told me.
yeah. I I also think like that in some ways I think some people that I'm related to would prefer that like someone like me would wear devil horns and prance around and like be a horrible mean person because then they can be like, well, you don't have Jesus and
Yes.
that's because you are so evil.
Yes. You're
I
easier to hate that way.
Yeah, and I had someone say to me, it was in regards to like COVID stuff and like wanting to stay safe and not, and it was like it was like spring of 2020, so it was the height of it. And the person said like, you don't get to pretend to be a good person. Or no, wait,
What?
they said you don't get to use this idea that you're a good person, against everybody. And it was like,
Uh,
it,
what?
and to me, it was so clear of like, if I don't align with your beliefs, then I have to be a bad person. It's not even about, oh, you don't like cilantro? I don't like cilantro either. Okay, great. Like it is I feel like for some people it has to be the extreme because then if if it isn't, then what are they doing? Then like why are they putting in so much work?
Right.
And if you can just like relax on a Sunday morning, but then volunteer at a homeless shelter and like and that isn't gonna, drag you to hell. They're like, wait, well then, but what do I get out of that?
And that's such an interesting way to put it. I never thought about it like that. It's if you're not the caricature of an evil person, if you're nice, if you chill, if you mind your own business, if you help other people, if you have fun and you're smiling and you're independent, then like you said, it's very like, but I want those things. Like how can they do those things and not get punished for that? I'm confused. Like she's
Yeah.
supposed to be evil. Like you're supposed to be evil. Yeah, no, I can absolutely see how that would
It's like
I
when
that would send them.
people meet a gay person and they're like, "Oh, you're just like going to get your groceries with your husband."
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
But I need you to be this evil, like horrible demon because then if I'm hating you so much, it needs to be real.
Right. Where's your I Heart Abortions shirt? You're supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
wearing one of those.
You're
You're
supposed to be
supposed to
just
be
giving out abortions, you
right.
know?
You're supposed to be telling us that we all need to be gay married. I thought that
Yeah,
was your whole thing.
yeah.
Yeah. The number of people who are who hear, obviously they hear that I'm an atheist and that I host a podcast, et cetera, et cetera. And then they meet me. They're like, you are a nice person. Like, I thought I was going to get grilled today. I know that the majority of the emails that I don't get back from people are because on paper, I probably seem like their worst nightmare, right? Or somebody who's just going to like attack them. When in reality, it's like, no, we just vibe. We sit here, we talk about Pokemon, we talk about your religion. I ask you questions. You can see my dog when I don't have a green screen. Like, we just vibe.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's
but
almost like
that's an
you're a
interesting way to put it.
person. Like
Yeah.
like you're a person, they're a person.
Yeah.
And I think if you make religious beliefs or any kind of belief like the primary part of your personality,
Yes.
then then either everybody has to align with it or people have to be totally counter to you.
Yes.
And I think, that's where we go sour with like a lot of conservative versus liberal ideas. It's like, oh, liberal tears and conservative MAGA hats. And I'm like, okay, but those are the people that are trying to get on camera. Like,
Yes.
where are the normal people who, are maybe not very smart about social issues, but it's like, for the most part, I don't know. I for the most part, I believe people want to be good and they
Yes.
want good for other people.
Yes.
We have a small sect of talking heads that are
Yeah.
like, no, I actually want to like stir up shit and I want to cause trouble
Yes.
and I want people to feel bad. We have some politicians who are like, I want to hurt this group of people. It
Yes.
will make me feel good and it will make me richer. And that
Yes.
is very important to me.
Yes.
But I do think for the most part, people are just throwing a lot of things at the wall and they're like, what makes me feel good? Does
Yes.
this make me feel, am I allowed to stop doing things that don't make me feel good?
Yeah. Yeah. And what's wild is when you actually ever have the opportunity to talk to somebody. Like, say, for example, I'm very liberal. And like when I've had moments where I've gotten to talk to conservative, especially conservative religious people one on one, it's amazing when you are both given the chance to speak, how much you actually have in common. And like you said, how much you both want to see certain things come true and come to fruition. Just the way that you feel that's possible is different. So, like you say, I don't want children to starve to death. And they say, I don't want children to starve to death. And you say, I think people with cancer should be able to get their cancer treated. And they say, I also think people with cancer should be able to get their cancer treated. And I'm like, great. I would love for everyone to get to go to school and eat lunch. And they're like, yeah, me too. And I'm like, I think there are ways we can do that with taxes. And they say, I think we should pray to God. And I was like, okay, well, we differ there.
Ooh, yeah.
But like,
Results based.
right. Like, adopt, don't shop. Maybe we can both, okay, we can both, like, we both like adopting animals. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But it's wild. The ways that we view our ideal utopia are so similar. But the way that media and rumors and Facebook has made us view each other, they think, oh, the liberals just want to take all of our money and give it to all the people who don't want to work. Like, they just want to take our guns and our money and distribute it to everybody. So I have to work and you never have to,
And
which
I'm
is
like,
not.
yeah.
It's like that's like
No, but
that's such a it's like, but no, like, I don't want
right.
you to work. Like, I'm also willing to work and pay more so that people with cancer don't have to have cancer.
Love
And
that.
you think they just want us all to live in this religion state where we all pray to God during school, and like, when in reality, what we both want is we just want things to not suck so much. Now, granted, there is always, like you said, there's always going to be that person that's like, no, actually, I want stuff to suck because it sucked when I was young and I want it to suck for you. But one, I think those people are mentally ill. I think there's more going. I think they need very serious amounts of therapy. Two, even some of those people, when they don't have an audience, are willing to admit they don't actually think that.
Oh,
Again,
yeah.
it's just about triggering the libs. It's about getting on TV. It's about getting retweeted. So many of those people are also just basically performance artists, like low grade
Oh, yeah.
performance artists, or very mentally ill and they
Yeah.
need support,
Well,
which
and
I
this is
also think they
even,
should get.
yeah, but this is the thing I think about going back to religion. Anyone who stands up at a pulpit is a performer.
They are.
And I think that that's not always a bad thing. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're liars,
Mm,
but I just think like you have to have someone in a leadership position who is
yeah.
going to say things that are extreme in the way of like, if you have a boss that's like, and next year we're going to double our sales. And you're like,
Right.
yeah, we're not going to. But like, I'm glad that Jeff thinks we are, like if somebody's got to
Right.
pump it up a little bit. And I just think, I don't know, for me, I just think religion has had its time and place.
Yes.
And again, I just keep seeing the negativity flow out of it.
Yes.
And I'm like, shut up and go volunteer somewhere,
Yeah.
go do that. Go build a
Right.
school, man. I don't need to have anybody. We don't need people writing books. Like
Right.
we truly don't need another white man writing a book about his relationship to Jesus. But like
But I
we
bet it's a unique take, Eileen.
know,
It's probably a
God.
very unique take.
Oh, did he pull himself up by his bootstraps? I hope so.
Yeah, there's a great segment about how nobody wants to work anymore. You should
Oh,
check it out. It's just beautiful. Um, but well, yeah, and I think also there are things about church that I like, and there are things about church that I don't like. For example, churches that run a food bank. I think it's wonderful. Churches that use that food bank to preach to people who are just there to get a hot meal is not okay. I don't
right.
think people should have to sit through a sermon because they were hungry that day. If you run like a used clothing drive, I think it's wonderful. If you do that so that you can staple a verse to the inside of every article of clothing and also make people sit through a sermon, you shouldn't have to take advantage of people's disadvantage in order for them to hear your message. Now, if they've come and they've eaten soup there or gotten a sandwich there every single week, and then separately, maybe like on their way out, you're like, hey, just out of curiosity, would you be interested in hearing what else we do here? That's different as opposed to, well, now I have to sit here and listen to this because they gave me food and I feel like I owe them because I was in need today. That's not how a religion should make you feel.
Right.
And I think the same thing about, if a religion makes you feel like you want to be a good person, then by all means continue to worship that religion. If a religion makes you feel like you better be a good person or else you're going to burn in hell forever, that's again not consensual. There's nothing
Yeah.
consensual about that, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, and it makes me think of just the idea. It makes me think about like, riding on the train and people playing their music and you're like, I don't want to hear this music. Like
Yes.
I
Yes.
didn't sign up for this,
Yes. That's such a good way to put it.
I
Yeah.
don't want to listen to this. And I also think that religion, particularly Christianity, has has gotten the word out. People are not like
Y'all did
totally
it.
devoid of
We all know who Jesus
understanding.
is.
Yes, familiar. Now I think, of course, people might have misconceptions or people blah
Right.
blah blah blah. But the idea of like, oh, I need to spread the word. It's like, mm,
Y'all got it done, man. You
yeah,
you cornered the market.
yeah.
Yeah.
My uncle is an Episcopalian priest, um,
Interesting.
and he we were all together for a funeral a few months ago, and some Jehovah's Witnesses came to the door, and I answered it, and I was like, "Oh, we've got a lot of we've been grieving, so we've got a lot of like belief in here. Like we're all good. We're set." And so then they went away. And my uncle came downstairs. We were like, oh yeah, it's just some Jehovah's Witnesses. He's like, are they still here? I'd love to talk to them. And because he just like wanted to talk to them. And he just like finds the conversation so interesting because he's
Yeah,
like,
me too.
he's like, you're not going to convert me. I'm not going to convert you. But like,
Yeah.
what is your life like? And well, he has like Jehovah's Witnesses who will come back to his house over and over again because they know he's open to conversation about
Yeah.
it. But it was just such an interesting, like, we were all a little bit like, ooh, and he was like, I'd love to talk to them.
Yeah, I've never scared a Jehovah's Witness more than this poor girl that asked me if I'd if I'd ever heard of Jehovah's Witness, except she said she called it something else. There's like a new phrase that she used. And I said, "Oh, Jehovah's Witness." And she's like, "Well, yeah." And I was so excited to talk to her that it like scared her. Like you could tell it was one of those. Have you ever like been at a party and you're talking to somebody and they just go kind of left field and they just start talking crazy stuff and you're like, "Oh no, there's a reason this person was standing alone." And in my effort to be more friendly, I have since that was the look she was giving me. I was like so excited to talk to her. And then she never came back, which was sad. But so where do you think you stand now in terms of, do you think there's an afterlife? Do you think there's places people go after they die? Like, in your opinion, and there doesn't have to be any fact to back it up. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Where do you stand in terms of life after death or beyond, if there is any?
I think that's my biggest driving factor and why I can't fully let go of the idea that there is a divine creator. Because I can't believe that we die and then nothing.
Yeah.
I can't believe that. Like that there's too much. So one of my very best friends died in August, just had a heart attack, collapsed and died. And
I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you. It's just the worst. And you're just like, well, there's no way. Like, there's no way that Elise is gone because there's too much of her.
Right.
And even as I say it, I'm like, I know I'm sounding ignorant and I know I'm
No,
like,
not at all.
But it's like, it's just not, that can't be. And then things happen where you're like, she came to somebody in a dream and she said this to somebody's friend in the shower. Like there's gotta be something. And also I'm just like, there's no way that she's just gonna go,
Right.
like she's fighting to get back here. You know,
Right.
like
Right.
she's wrestling an angel to
Yeah.
come and give us beautiful gifts. Like there's
Yeah.
just no way that it is over.
Yeah. Some people are just so much larger than life.
Yeah.
That you're like, there's no way that they end here. This simply cannot be the end for them.
Yeah.
Have you ever been under anesthesia before?
Only one time when I got my wisdom teeth out. And the way I experienced it was they gave it to me and then I wasn't passing out.
Oh.
But so I could still like feel them.
Like Twilight kind of? Like the
Yeah. And I was like, ooh. And so like I could feel them poking me and touching me. And I was like, this is not going to go well. It didn't hurt, but I was like, something bad is going to happen. And then I looked next to me and I said, Chewbacca, what are we going to do about this? And Chewbacca was like, I don't know. And then I fell asleep.
Girl, I don't know.
So I was like, that doesn't seem like it was real.
I'm glad that's where it ended though.
Yeah. Oh my God. And then I woke up like the next instant.
Yes.
But an hour had passed.
Yes. Yes. That's the way that I try to view it, is if death is like my experience with anesthesia, where literally 3 hours later, then that was the first time I was ever able to wrap my brain around what they mean when they say lights out. Because, when I was a Christian and you thought about like people who weren't Christians dying, you're like, oh, so there's nothing? So it's just a black abyss? And they're like, no, there's nothing. And you're like, so you're just in the dark? And they're like, no, there's literally nothing. Like, you experiencing the dark is still something. That's still a thing. And I could not wrap my brain around how there could be nothing until the first time I was put under anesthesia. And then I was like, oh,
There's nothing.
Nothing. Like, I wasn't wandering around in a black room. But at the same time, I totally understand what you mean, where like certain people still feel like they're here.
Yeah.
And they stick around for a long time. And it's just so impossible to imagine a world where they just live and then they just don't live anymore, because they live on through so many people.
Yeah.
Their memory, their action, their art.
Exactly. And as a person, it's like, well, what is the purpose then if we don't, I don't know, if like it like, to me, that just starts getting so crazy. And it is like, so what is the legacy you leave? You know, what are the things you have done on this planet? And you can, maybe you get to write a book about your life and how great you were, but a lot of times people just get hit by a car and they die of heart attack. They just suddenly die, and you're like, oh, well then, it seems like it's not fair that, like that is the end of their life.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Eileen, this has just been a really fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed picking your brain. I want to be respectful of your time. I realize we're going a little bit over time, but if people wanted to check out more of your stuff, maybe the things you've got coming up, where could they find anything about you, or where could they find you on social media?
I'm pretty much, there's not a lot of Eileen Tulls out there. There's one lady who lives in Maryland who shows her flowers, but otherwise the Eileen Tull is probably me. But I'm on Instagram at Eileen.Tull. Facebook, Eileen Tull, and I'm still on Twitter for some reason.
Same. I don't know why I'm still on Twitter.
I know, it's out of habit. But if you're in Chicago, I'm starting up a new collective called Fat Theater Project.
Cool.
Telling fat stories and exploring work by fat creators in a theater space. And so we'll have some readings in February and March. In 2024, awesome. Which is now. We are in 2024.
Oh my gosh. When you said that like snapped my head back for a second.
I'm so used to saying in 2024.
Yeah.
In the
future.
Happen. Oh boy.
Well, Eileen, thank you so much for your time and your story. I really appreciate getting the chance to talk to you. If you have any links to any of your fat stories or your fat theater collective, is that what it's called? The Fat Theater Collective?
Fat Theater Project.
Perfect. I would love to link any of that in the description, and I can even go back and do that later if that's something that comes up in the future. And for anybody listening, if you had any questions or comments, we'd love to hear your comments, or I suppose read your comments on any platform that you're listening or watching, or you can email me at createcollabcomedy@gmail.com. And if you have any questions for Eileen, I'd love to send them her way, or just nice comments or thoughts on the episode. Mean comments you can send to me, I guess, but I won't send them to Eileen. But people are pretty nice. I've never gotten any mean comments, but I'm waiting for the day. One of these days.
Somebody.
They'll be like, I hate Sydney's background. She needs to go back to not using a green screen.